Hello everyone, this is Joe with my podcast, Overanalyzing Games, in which I go in depth about games I've played and give my opinions on them. Today, for this episode, I wanted to start off with yet another gripe of mine about the worst game ever created in all of human history, Chrono Cross. For this episode, I'll be vocalizing my personal review of the game after I had stopped playing it years ago. So without further ado, my review of the worst game ever, Chrono Cross. Chrono Cross is a sequel to the fabled game Chrono Trigger. This game attempted a different approach from most sequels by changing the focus of the story and characters completely. Like all Squaresoft games of the PS1 era, battle system attempts to be unique and original to stand out from the rest of the games during their time. The story is horrendously executed. There is just no way around it. Chrono Cross fails to hold the player's attention or even explain what is going on. Normally, in role-playing games created by Square, it becomes captivating almost immediately. There's always a hook in the beginning. At least with other PS1 Squaresoft games, it keeps hold of the player's interest with mystery and character growth, but unfortunately, this game utterly fell flat in that regard. Oftentimes, you're told to keep moving with no understanding of where, how, or what you're supposed to be doing in the story. Characters will randomly tell you vague hints on what to do sometimes, but half the time you have to look through just about everywhere to find out what you're supposed to be doing at all. And it's not the case where you talk to NPCs and find out. It's just left totally vague, and the NPCs don't even really give you much hints either. There simply isn't a rhyme or reason for any of the story events to make sense of it all. In effect, it's not a coherent story, it's more a set of random events that are given credence where there should be none, because nothing about motivation, how, what, when, and why has even been established when events occur in this game. It's tedious and just plain annoying to go through. The game simply fails at giving direction half the time, and the times it does are basically tantamount to, and this is an example, oh hey, we should go to X location. We might find something there at X location. Let's go to X location, come on. But there are two obvious problems. It simply isn't given enough explanation on why, and the game gets the name of the location wrong at times, and that is absolutely infuriating, as it worsens the entire issue. Now, social issues that this game tries to focus on, such as racism, just degenerate to discourse that simply states, all humans are at fault for everything. That is the presupposition given throughout the game's storyline. There is just nothing more to it at all. No explanation of why, how, or what humans did to warrant such hostility. The only explanation you will ever get is everything in the entire world is the entire human race's fault, as if it were a given. We're expected to take this statement at face value when your group, including your human hero, stops an ethnic cleansing of the fairy population committed by fire-breathing mechanical dwarves. None of which makes sense, as you don't even know why this ethnic cleansing even began or what even the purpose served. In fact, when I was talking to the dwarves that I'm about to fight, they're like, oh, humans are to blame for this, even as they're killing fairies. And then after you rescue the fairies are like, oh, humans are to blame for everything, even though you just stopped an ethnic cleansing. I honestly don't see how a game can get any dumber than that. In terms of expressing a sensitive subject matter, in, quite frankly, one of the most astoundingly stupid ways imaginable. I just don't see how it could have been worse than what they did here. I mean, unless they were being overtly racist, that would be the only other thing I can think of that could make this worse than what it was, as far as any fantasy setting. Both the dwarves and the fairies blame your group because you're human, and the only explanation is humans are at fault for everything. And I was left to wonder if one of the themes of this game was simply misanthropy, because it comes very, very close to being pro-misanthropic, considering how they expressed themes of Chrono Cross. Gameplay. The turn-based battle system is just a horrendously executed waste. It attempted to be unique and forgot common sense during the decision-making process of the gameplay. Random encounters are rendered useless with no level-ups allowed. Outside of boss battles, any items or usable magic spells you may obtain are pointless because boss battles give you enough money to simply buy those items or magic spells in town shops. Participating in more than one or two of these random battles per dungeon will yield a wholesome supply of raw materials for forging items such as armor. But overall, it's a grand waste to even implement this armor forging system because none of these items are really all that difficult to obtain. Makes the entire forging system feel tedious. To go into more details regarding just how poorly the system is made, the magic system gives you a tree of customizable options to put magic spells you want in a particular section of this tree, so that the more physical attacks you use, the more open this tree becomes in battle, and the more magic points you get to unleash stronger magic attacks. It sounds interesting, but the execution is absolutely dreadful. You must wait at times to attack if you've run out of stamina, which makes the gameplay feel slower than it should. It has a magic field system that makes using the same magic element stronger in battle. The field can go up to 4 dimensions, but this only creates a system where spamming the same magic elements will make you win the battle quicker, and gives you incentive to just do that, to just spam the same magic spell to beat the entire game, basically. There really isn't much thinking required despite the so-called deepness of this game. You just have to guard a bit to replenish stamina and just spam the same magic spell type over and over again. Even worse than that, you do have the option to have magic spells that force an enemy to inherit a certain magical element, and if you hit them with the opposite element and keep spamming that, you'll just totally wreck them. It's just so easy throughout this game to do that. As soon as you get, like, say, a force yellow or force black element or force white element and just use the opposite element, you're in the clear for the entire game, basically. You could beat it easily. So, yeah, there really isn't much thinking required, despite the deepness, as I said. The magic system, which attempts to be unique like everything else in this game, is just a downgrade from the standard turn-based RPG type of gameplay. How many normal attacks you accurately hit on an opponent determine the level of spells you can cast, and there is no restraint to stop you from using your strongest spells all the time in this framework. In fact, it encourages it. Gaining drops is kind of pointless because you get them so easily, but it feels like a meaninglessly tedious system as a result, because you can just buy the same items and it's fine. Even then, you won't need any of this because the random battles are laughably easy and, as mentioned before, don't give you any experience points and are thus felt as if they're just a waste of time. The physical combat in battle is just painful to play. It's a 3-point system: weak, medium, and strong physical attacks. Weaker hits are more accurate. For every hit, all of your attacks will become more accurate by small incremental percentages. Unfortunately, like everything else in this game, it's poorly executed. It really just means you have to click the button 3 times instead of just once for normal enemies to go down. Accuracy against weaker enemies never does increase. You'll have to deal with the same accuracy against enemies no matter what, because there is no leveling outside of boss battles. So it's just a dredge. Complete sluggish dredge. This makes the gameplay an aggravating chore. It should be called many things, but fun definitely isn't one of them. Now, the characters. Out of 44 characters, only 3 or so of them get any real development as characters. Even then, I'm being lenient in this regard. Most of them are just given funny accents to appear unique. The problem, of course, is that when all of them try to look unique, they all result in becoming bland and forgettable. The characters' outfits and accents don't really fit well with the story or the setting they are in. Characters in video games and in literature are defined by their personality, first and foremost, and none of these characters really have any. I'll just phrase it in a sort of question. What is a Mexican wrestler doing in a circus, and why does he suddenly want to join you just because some child died in an accident? I wish I was joking about that. The stupidest part about all of this is that you can only have 3 characters in a battle at a time, so you won't even be using over half these cast members. So what was the point of having a roster of over 40 characters? Many of these characters have the same one-liner dialogue throughout the story. They all seem to be in favor of the Mary Sue heroine at all times, despite when said heroine wants to kill you and the group of sick and dying innocent people, and the one-liner person as well. The morality of the game seems to just be agreeing with anything and everything the heroine's horribly broken ideology says is right. This really gave me a negative opinion on this game. The story felt like a childish melodrama without any thought or consideration on tone, settings, or differences in opinion. The player is simply expected to believe that one person has all the right answers and ignore the implications of human rights crimes. No, that is not an exaggeration. She tries to bomb refugees hiding in a secluded island at a certain point in the story, and the refugees include 2 innocent children. We're expected to believe that she's just being innocently deceived into doing these actions by a villain in the story that ignores a very fine detail. She tries to bomb refugees fleeing from a war. The morality of this game is just horrendous. As you play the story, you'll start to realize that common sense and intelligence just doesn't exist with any of these characters. Most of them are just RPG archetypes and have no interesting qualities to speak of. If you find 1 or 2 interesting, then it might just be because you like the archetype that's being represented, like the Terminator-styled robot with Super Saiyan hair, but you can't expect deep characterization from any of these characters here, let alone sanity. The main character is one of the worst aspects of this game. He's a silent protagonist and just doesn't mesh with his environment or the story. The player is given questions and concerns, but the main protagonist, all he can really say is the ellipses, silent ellipses, as an answer. It just shows how no critical thinking was involved in this game's project development. This is particularly bad for a company like Squaresoft. of the PS1 era. The simple fact is that games such as Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VIII, and Final Fantasy IX managed to make picking a variation of choices in a well-organized manner in their respective games. The characters had some similar qualities to the silent protagonist type of style and were well portrayed in their games. In fact, Chrono Trigger is one of the most remarkable with this on the Super Nintendo. The plot didn't focus too much on Chrono's characterization, so you weren't met with expectations such as those required for characters like Cloud, Squall, Zidane, and the main protagonist of this game, Surge. It's easy to see that this game was not developed by the original game makers of Chrono Trigger because of its downright shoddy handling of this story's silent protagonist. Sorry, Masato Kato, but Runbu, Sakaguchi, Akira Toriyama, and Yuji Horii have all proven to be more capable at creating a good plot and interesting characters than you will ever be in your entire lifetime. Now, side notes. The story itself, or rather whatever bits and pieces you were given, well, at the time I didn't think it seemed too bad. It appeared to be interesting enough, but the actual story segments are far too apart from each other. The story drags its feet around after you've finished about your convoluted and confusing jumble of a journey. The plot tries to resolve itself by large boxes of text that exist at the very end of the game that tries to make sense of it for you. You just aren't given any understanding at all on what the events mean, why they're important, or why you need to be there, or what your actions have caused for 99% of this game as you play through these events. And that's just pathetic. Honestly, that's just pathetic. This completely ruins the tone, setting, and overall interest for the player. The worst factor of this is that because the game lacks any character depth in the villains, their motives and actions don't make any sense either. You have two incoherent opposing sides that, frankly, don't really make for a good story. So you're left with a confusing mess of a so-called story by the end of it. The entire experience is honestly a train wreck. It just reinforces the fact that this game tried to be different and edgy without any concern for common sense. It's just plain befuddling. In every metaphorical sense of what train wreck means when someone explains that a story is a train wreck. Chrono Cross is the epitome of a storyline that is a train wreck. Defenders of the game will tell you that it does make sense, but you'll find they're just as horribly confused as you are. In the end, they'll probably direct you to a website filled with fan theories of information that contradict the game. The problem with that is the game's plot is self-contradictory. First issue is, the game's plot contradicts Chrono Trigger, since Luca was clearly homeschooled by her genius father. Time Guru was Gaspar, and not Balthazar, and that is a rather damning contradiction since Gaspar was a very significant part in Chrono Trigger. And the Dreamstone was never part of Lavos. In fact, Chrono Trigger explicitly shows that the rocks existed as a natural resource before Lavos even crashed into the world. More importantly, if the time pendant was lost in the darkness beyond time of a certain character, then Marley could never have inherited the pendant from her family line, and thus both games could never have happened. For some of the game, you have to do extra side quests to obtain extra story explanations for the side characters that you're curious about. However, these in-depth events aren't delved upon enough and don't give much to go on either. Overall, a very pathetic way to rid itself of story gaps. The fact that they had to rely upon gigantic boxes of text at the end cements this issue. Chrono Cross Forums may point you to a fan theory website that make up their own stories based off poor analogies, not any honest attempt at thematic analysis. Most fans are left arguing over fan-made theories about the game, than any genuine criticism about the content of the game itself. To the extent that they'll contradict events in the game because they like their fan-on theories much better. Because then they don't have to admit that it's just a trash game. Now, important information. If somehow this has made you curious about playing Chrono Cross to see how trashy it is, or if you think I'm wrong and you want to prove it by playing the game yourself and forming your own opinion, which is fine, of course. But important information. There are bad batches of this game that will crash on you during the first dungeon. I had the unfortunate experience of purchasing one of these unplayable batches. I was able to continue on by using my PS3 to play Chrono Cross instead of my PS1, but this created the unfortunate glitch that locked my spells so that I couldn't use them during the entire first dungeon and the boss battles. After the first dungeon, I went back to playing on the PlayStation 1, and the problem appeared to stop. But this is honestly another nail in the proverbial coffin. This game is unplayable by normal standards. If I didn't have a PS3, I wouldn't have been able to resolve this issue at all, and even then I encountered glitches because of it. So yes, this game deserves the score that I'll be giving it, because it is unplayable for some people who were unfortunate enough to get the bad batch from the Greatest Hits edition, like I was. And that's apparently 1/3 of all the Greatest Hits physical copies of Chrono Cross. So the final score is 1 out of 10. 1 out of 10. And I could do lower. Viewers, thank you for watching. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you'd like, please support me on Patreon. There are links in the description box below. Thank you for listening.